After my wife died, I forced her 12-year-old son out. 10 years later, he invited me to his gallery, then showed me a DNA test that left me speechless. The painting stopped me dead. Not because it was beautiful, though it was. Not because the technique was extraordinary, though every critic in the room seemed to think so. It stopped me because I recognized the man in the doorway. I recognized the small boy walking away. I recognized the torn backpack hanging off one shoulder. The way the figure was rendered in blurry, half-formed strokes, like a memory that the mind keeps trying to sharpen but can't, because some part of you decided long ago that forgetting was safer than knowing. The title card on the wall read, "The Night I Lost My Father," and standing in a glass-walled gallery surrounded by 60 journalists and art collectors in shoes that cost more than my first car, I understood, with perfect, gut-hollowing clarity, exactly what I had done, what I had thrown away, what I could never, ever take back. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 53 years old. I run a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in Portland, and until approximately 9 minutes before that moment, I had spent a decade telling myself that I was a practical man who had made a difficult but reasonable decision in an impossible situation. I was wrong about almost everything. Let me go back. Marina and I met in 2002 at a fundraiser for a children's hospital, the kind of event I attended purely for business networking, and left, uncharacteristically, with a phone number I actually intended to use. She was 31. I was 34. She had a laugh that filled a room and dark eyes that noticed things most people didn't bother looking at. She also had a son. Liam was 3 years old when we started dating. His biological father, a man named Kevin Kowalski, who Marina had been with briefly in her late 20s, had evaporated from the picture before the boy could form a coherent memory of him. No custody arrangement, no child support, no contact. Just a man who decided, apparently without much internal conflict, that fatherhood wasn't for him. I told myself at the time that I respected Marina for handling it alone, that I admired her resilience. What I didn't tell myself, what I buried under the admiration and the attraction and the very real love I had for her, was that I viewed Liam as a complication, a logistical obstacle, a small human liability attached to a woman I wanted in my life. We married in 2004. Liam was 5. I paid for his schooling, his clothes, his food, his pediatric appointments. I showed up to parent-teacher conferences. I signed permission slips. I did everything a father was supposed to do from a technical standpoint, but I never once felt what I imagine a father feels when he looks at his child. I told myself that was fine. I told myself some people weren't wired for that kind of attachment. I told myself Liam would be fine because he had Marina, and Marina was extraordinary, and extraordinary mothers produce resilient children. I told myself a lot of things. Marina died on a Tuesday. A stroke. Fast, catastrophic, no warning, or rather warnings she hadn't mentioned because she didn't want to worry anyone. She was 43 years old. She was making coffee. She was gone before the paramedics arrived. I was in Seattle for a conference. I found out via a phone call from our neighbor, Denise Hartwell, a retired school librarian who had been checking in on the house while I was away. Denise told me she had already called Marina's sister, Patricia. She told me Patricia was on her way. She did not tell me, because I did not ask, that Liam had been home when it happened, that a 12-year-old boy had watched his mother collapse, had called 911 himself, had sat in the kitchen alone for 40 minutes before the ambulance arrived, holding his mother's hand and talking to her even after it was clear she could no longer hear him. I did not think to ask those questions. I got on a plane. The month that followed Marina's death is something I don't revisit often, not because it was painful, though it was, but because when I examine my own behavior during that period with any real honesty, I don't recognize the person I was. Grief does strange things to people. I understand that now. Some people become more generous, more open, more desperate for connection. Some people become architects of distance, building walls and calling it self-preservation. I was the second kind. Within 3 weeks, I had made the decision. I remember framing it to myself as a practical assessment. Liam was not legally my son. I had never adopted him. Marina's will left certain personal items to her sister Patricia and a small college fund to Liam, but there was no legal mechanism that required me to maintain guardianship. Patricia, who lived in Phoenix and had her own family, made it clear she was unable to take him in. The boy had no other family. I told myself I was being honest. Honest with him. Honest with myself. Better to be clear now than to maintain a pretense that would eventually collapse under the weight of my own resentment. I told myself it was the kinder option. I sat Liam down on a Thursday evening. He was at the kitchen table doing homework. I remember that. Algebra, I think. He looked up when I sat across from him, and Marina's eyes looked back at me from that small, serious face, and I felt nothing. That was the thing. I kept waiting to feel something that would stop me. Some biological override, some bolt of protective instinct. It didn't come. Pack your things, I said. You're not my son. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He didn't ask me where he was supposed to go. He was 12 years old and he already understood, on some cellular level, that certain people are not going to change their minds no matter what you say to them. Marina had probably taught him that, in whatever quiet ways a mother teaches a child to read the room. He went to his bedroom. He came back with a torn blue backpack. I remember the tear along the left shoulder strap, a rip he'd never asked me to fix. And he walked to the front door and he opened it and he stepped out out into the dark. I watched the door close, and I felt relief. That is the part I have never said out loud until now. Not guilt, not grief on top of grief. Relief, like a contract had been fulfilled and a burden had been lifted, and I could now proceed with the business of rebuilding my life without the weight of someone else's child hanging from my collar. I sold the house within 2 months, moved to Portland, started a new firm, met a woman named Diane 3 years later, married her, built a new life, clean and ordered and entirely unencumbered. For 10 years, Liam Kowalski barely crossed my mind. On the rare nights he did, usually around the holidays, usually after a second glass of scotch, I would feel a brief dark flicker of something I refused to name. I would think he was a resourceful kid. Marina raised him well, he's probably fine. And then, quietly, shamefully, I would think the other thing. The thought I buried so deep, I almost convinced myself I'd never had it. If he didn't make it, if the streets swallowed him up, maybe that's easier. For everyone. I buried it. I moved on. I was, in my own estimation, a practical man. The call came on a Wednesday morning in October 9 months ago. I was at my desk reviewing a commercial lease agreement when my cell phone rang. Unknown number, Portland area code. I almost didn't answer. I have a policy about unknown numbers that Diane finds irrational and that I maintain on the basis of pure intuition. That morning, I broke the policy. Mr. Cole, a woman's voice. Calm, professional, the kind of measured neutrality that belongs to personal assistants and attorneys. My name is Rachel Wen. I'm calling on behalf of the LK Gallery. Never heard of it, I said. We're opening this Saturday in the Pearl District. You've been personally invited to the grand opening. I appreciate that, but I'm not particularly interested in... Don't you want to know what happened to Liam? My hand went still on the desk. The lease agreement blurred. He asked for you specifically, Rachel Wen continued, in that same unhurried tone. He said the night wouldn't be complete without you there. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time, not moving, while the city went about its business outside my window. My coffee went cold. My 10 o'clock call reminder chimed and I silenced it. What does he want? That was the only question. I turned it over and over like a stone in my palm, examining every angle. Forgiveness? Possible. Some people needed the formal architecture of a confrontation to move past a wound. I could understand that intellectually. Money? Also possible. He'd built something, a gallery apparently, in one of Portland's most expensive neighborhoods. But galleries were notoriously cash-hungry. And if he'd grown up in poverty, perhaps he'd decided his absentee stepfather owed him a debt. Revenge? That was the one I kept coming back to. That was the one that made my palms sweat. I told Diane I had a networking event on Saturday. I went to the gallery. The LK Gallery occupied a converted warehouse on NW 13th Avenue. Glass-fronted, industrial bones, the kind of space that real estate developers spend enormous amounts of money making look effortlessly curated. The opening had drawn a serious crowd. I recognized 2 arts journalists from the Oregonian, a couple of faces from the Portland Art Museum's donor circuit. Buyers I pegged immediately by the way they moved through a room, quietly, assessing, making decisions without appearing to. The initials above the entrance were rendered in brushed steel. LK Liam Kowalski, Marina's boy, that boy. I stood on the sidewalk for longer than I should have, long enough that a passing couple glanced at me twice, before I straightened my jacket and walked in. The work on the walls was extraordinary. I don't know enough about visual art to articulate why with any precision, but I know what it feels like to stand in front of something made by a person who has survived things. And every piece in that room had that quality. Dense with color in some places, almost violently spare in others. Figures in motion, figures in stillness. Light breaking through windows at angles that felt specific and personal, like they'd been observed from a particular vantage point at a particular time of life. The crowd parted as I moved through the lobby, and then I saw it, the central piece. It was large, maybe 4 feet by 6, hung at the room's focal point where every sightline in the space eventually led. A figure in a doorway, rendered in those blurry, grief-fogged strokes. The light behind the figure was warm and interior. The space in front, where a small boy walked away, torn backpack on his left shoulder, was dark. The boy's face was turned just slightly, not quite looking back, not quite gone. I read the title card, The Night I Lost My Father. The floor felt uncertain beneath me. I had a feeling you'd come. The voice came from my left, and it hit me the way cold water hits. Sudden, total, every nerve ending awake at once. I turned slowly. He was tall, lean in the way of someone who had spent years being hungry and never entirely lost the memory of it. His dark hair was Marina's. His cheekbones were Marina's. His eyes, steady, intelligent, carrying a particular quality of attention that saw more than it revealed, were Marina's, exact and unmistakable. But the stillness, the composure, the way he stood in his own gallery like a man who had built every inch of it from bedrock, that was entirely his. Liam, I said. The word came out barely above a whisper. Hello, Mr. Cole. Not Dad. Not Adrian. Not even a last name delivered with hostility. Just a formal address, the kind you'd offer a stranger at a professional function. Polite, precise, utterly devastating in its accuracy. Mr. Cole. I deserved that. I deserved every syllable of it. He led me through a door at the back of the gallery, into a room that had clearly been set up for this specific purpose. A round table, 2 chairs, a folder, closed, in the center, and on the walls, photographs, news clippings, exhibition announcements, pencil sketches pinned in sequence like a timeline. A life documented from the outside in, because there had been no one on the inside to document it. I looked at the photographs. A teenager in an oversized jacket, sitting on a bench in what I recognized as Portland's Union Station. The timestamp in the corner read, Winter 2014, 2 years after I'd put him out. His face was thinner than I remembered. His eyes had already begun developing that quality of watchfulness that would define the man standing in front of me now. Another photo, a boy scrubbing floors in what appeared to be an art studio. Industrial sink, paint-streaked concrete, canvases stacked against every wall. According to the handwritten caption on the back, this was taken at the Cascade Arts Collective, a non-profit studio space in Northeast Portland. The boy in the photo was approximately 15. Exhibition announcements from his early 20s, small galleries, community spaces, a group show at a coffee shop, then larger venues, then a review in the Oregonian, then a piece in Art Forum, then an acquisition by a private collector I recognized from Portland's business circles, then this gallery, his gallery, built from the ground up, from nothing, from a torn backpack and a Tuesday night. I lived in shelters for almost 2 years, he said. His voice was flat and informational, like a doctor reading a chart. Group homes for a few months after that. I aged out of the foster system at 18. He paused. Then an art teacher. Her name is Clara Mendez. She runs the Cascade Collective. She let me work in her studio after hours, sweeping, organizing, doing whatever needed doing. In exchange, I got a corner and some supplies. He stopped. She called me son. The words landed in the room like stones dropped in still water. Slow, spreading, impossible to contain. She called him what I never did. Why did you invite me here? I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that, distantly, in the way you observe yourself from outside during a crisis. What do you want from me? He looked at me for a moment, not with anger, I noticed. Not with the burning, righteous fury I had, on some level, been braced for. Something quieter than that, sadder. He opened the folder. He pulled out a white envelope, the kind you'd find in a box of generic stationery. Nothing special about it except the handwriting on the front. A woman's handwriting. Familiar even after a decade. Marina's handwriting. Liam, when you're ready. She gave me this before she died, he said. I never opened it, not right away. I carried it for years. Through the shelters, through the studio, through the first exhibitions. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the last thing she gave me, and opening it meant there was nothing left to receive. He set it on the table in front of me. I opened it 6 months ago. Inside the envelope, a folded letter in Marina's hand, and behind it, a single document. Clinical format, lab letterhead, 2 columns of names and numerical data that, even to my untrained eye, resolved immediately into meaning. Paternity Pro Diagnostics, LLC. Specimen collection date, March 14th, 2012. Alleged father, Adrian Daniel Cole. Child, Liam Martin Kowalski. Probability of paternity, 99.8%. The room tilted. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that the physical space I was sitting in appeared to shift on its axis, the way a ship rolls when a wave hits broadside. Abrupt, vertiginous, the body registering what the mind hasn't yet processed. I read the document again, then I read it a third time. Then I sat very still and understood that every calculation I had made, every cold, practical, self-serving calculation that had led to a Thursday evening and a torn backpack and a 12-year-old boy stepping into the dark, had been built on a foundation that was not, in fact, practical at all. I had not been a man making a reasonable decision in an impossible situation. I had been a man who had abandoned his son, his actual, biological, 99.8% confirmed son. You were my father, Liam said, quietly, without drama, the way you state a fact that has been true for years and is now simply being acknowledged out loud. All along, my chest cracked open. That's the only way I can describe it. Not a metaphor of heartbreak, but something physical, like a structural failure behind the sternum. Every meal I hadn't asked about, every school play I'd attended in body and absent in spirit. Every time I'd looked through him, literally through him, like a window, to the woman behind him who was the actual object of my attention. Every time he'd shown me a drawing or a painting, and I'd said, that's nice, without looking. Every year of his life that I had been present for and not present for. My son. I didn't know, I started. I know you didn't. His voice was still level, still that unsettling, hard-won composure. But she did. She had this test done when he was still in the picture. Kevin, I mean. She wanted to be certain. She chose not to tell you. And then Kevin left, and she met you, and she still chose you. He paused. She chose you knowing you were his father, and chose not to tell you. I spent a long time being angry at her for that. I'm not anymore. I think she was afraid that if she told you, it would change the way you felt about her. The terrible irony of that, the absolute knife-in-the-gut irony, did not escape me. Marina had kept that secret to protect us, to protect what we had. And in doing so, she had ensured that when she was gone, there was nothing to protect Liam from the version of me that existed without her. She left me the letter, Liam continued. She told me she was sorry. She told me that I deserved to know and that she'd been a coward, and that if I was reading the letter, it probably meant she was gone. He stopped. She asked me to try to forgive you. She said, for the first time, something shifted in his face. Not breaking, exactly. A fracture, controlled, held in check by years of practice. She said you weren't as hard as you seemed. She said she believed that if you knew, you would have been different. The shaking started in my hands and moved inward. She was wrong, I said. Liam looked at me. Or maybe she wasn't, I said. I don't know. I don't know what kind of man I would have been if I had known. I'd like to think I stopped. I'd like to think a lot of things. None of it matters. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He reached into the folder again and removed a second document. This one I recognized. A formal letter. Law firm letterhead. Portland address. He placed it on the table beside the paternity test. My attorney's name is Susan Park, he said. She's been practicing family law for 22 years. She has a copy of everything in this folder. She has a signed statement from Dr. Neil Abramson at Paternity Pro. He's the lab director who processed the original test in 2012 and verified the documentation last month. She also has statements from Clara Mendez, Dr. Patricia Velez, she was my caseworker during my time in foster care, and 3 journalists from publications you would recognize. He folded his hands on the table. Marina's hands. My hands. Dr. Velez, Patricia, she asked me to call her that. She works for Multnomah County Child Services. She was assigned to my case in 2014 when I was flagged sleeping at Union Station. She documented everything. My age when I entered the system, the circumstances, the fact that a legal guardian had voluntarily, he paused on the word, let it sit there, relinquished contact without pursuing any formal placement arrangements. Liam, I'm not finished. I closed my mouth. I'm not here for money. I want to be clear about that. I built everything in this room, every piece on those walls, the lease on this building, the staff I pay. I did that without help from you or anyone who shares your DNA. He looked at me steadily. I'm also not here for an apology, because I've spent years understanding that what I actually needed was not something you were equipped to give. The room was very quiet. Then what do you want? I asked. There are 62 people in the next room, he said. Journalists, collectors, curators, people who have been following my work for years. Several of them already know this story. Not everything, not the DNA test, not the full timeline, but the broad strokes. They know the painting. They know its title. They know that the man in the doorway is a real person and that I invited him here tonight. He looked at me with those quiet, devastating, exactly Marina's eyes. I invited you here because you are my father, biologically, legally, factually, and because the people in that room are going to ask me questions tonight, and I refuse to lie. I have never lied, not once in my adult life, about what happened to me, about where I came from. He paused. And because I wanted you to see what I built, I wanted you, specifically you, to stand in front of that painting and understand what you walked away from. He stood. I've had my moment, he said quietly. Now the question is what you do with yours. He opened the door to the gallery. 62 faces turned toward us, and I stood at the threshold, the same threshold rendered in paint on the wall across the room, the same doorway, the same dark, and I understood that the choice in front of me was not about reputation or consequences or what version of this story would end up in the Oregonian on Sunday morning. The choice was simpler and more brutal than that. It was the same choice I'd made on a Thursday evening 11 years ago, and I had gotten it catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. I was not going to get it wrong again. I stepped into the gallery. The room had that particular quality of collective attention, 60-something people pretending not to watch while watching intently. I could feel the journalists recalibrating, could see phones being quietly raised, could hear the shift in ambient noise that happens when a room decides something important is about to occur. I walked to the center of the room. I stood in front of the painting, the night I lost my father, and I looked at it for a long moment, at the blurred man in the doorway, at the small boy walking away, torn backpack on his left shoulder, face tilted just slightly, not quite looking back. I turned around. Liam was standing about 15 feet away watching me. Susan Park, his attorney, was positioned near the back wall. I identified her by the way she was standing, alert, ready, a woman who had spent 2 decades knowing exactly when to intervene and exactly when to wait. Clara Mendez was beside her. I learned her identity later, but I could have guessed from the way she looked at Liam, the way a person looks at someone they chose. The journalists had their phones out now. No one was pretending anymore. I'm not going to reproduce my exact words here because some of what I said that night belongs to Liam and not to the internet, but I will tell you the shape of it. I told the room that Liam Kowalski was my son. I told them that I had not known this, that the truth had been withheld from both of us by circumstances I will not detail publicly because Marina is not here to speak for herself, and I refuse to damage her memory in order to explain my own failings. What I will say is that my ignorance does not exonerate me. A man who treats a child as an obligation, as a liability wearing a child's face, has already failed that child before the DNA becomes relevant. I told them that I had made a decision, 11 years ago, that no amount of explanation or context makes acceptable, that I had looked at a grieving 12-year-old boy whose mother had just died, and I had handed him a backpack and pointed at the door, that I had then spent a decade not thinking about him, which is its own particular kind of cruelty, not the violence of action, but the violence of erasure. I told them that he had built everything in this room himself, and that if there was a more complete refutation of every assumption I had made about him, I couldn't imagine what it would look like. The room was very quiet when I finished. Then I turned to Liam. I did not ask for forgiveness. He had already told me he hadn't invited invited me here for that, and I respected it. Forgiveness is something you offer when you're ready, not something you extend because the other person has finally, publicly, cornered themselves into accountability. What I said to him, and this part I will share, was this: I don't expect anything from you. You don't owe me anything. You never did. But I want you to know that I see you. I see what you made. I see who you are. And if there is ever a version of the future in which you want me in it, on whatever terms you choose, for whatever duration you choose, I will be there. Not because I've earned it, I haven't, but because you are my son, and because being your father is the most significant thing I will ever have failed at, and I intend to spend whatever time I have left being worthy of that fact. Liam looked at me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he said, okay, just that, okay. Not a reconciliation, not a Hollywood embrace, not the catharsis that everyone in the room probably wanted, just a single syllable that meant, I hear you. I'm not closing the door. From Liam Kowalski, who had survived 2 years in shelters on stubbornness and talent and whatever reserves of hope a 12-year-old boy carries with him into the dark, that single syllable was more than I deserved. The Oregonian ran the story on Sunday as I had anticipated. The headline was tasteful, arts journalism, not tabloid, and focused primarily on the gallery and Liam's career. The paternity test and my public statement were referenced in the 4th paragraph. Susan Park issued a brief statement confirming the documentation had been verified and that no legal action was being pursued. Dr. Patricia Velez gave an interview the following week to a podcast that covers the Oregon foster care system. She spoke about what she called voluntary abandonment, cases where a legal guardian removes themselves from a child's life without pursuing formal placement. She did not name me by name. She didn't need to. Clara Mendez wrote a short piece for the Cascade Arts Collective's newsletter about Liam. She called him the most disciplined artist she had ever mentored. She said he arrived at her studio at 15 with nothing but ability and an absolute refusal to give up. She said she had never once heard him speak about his childhood with bitterness, only with a kind of flat accuracy that she wrote was more devastating than bitterness would have been. I read that newsletter 3 times. It has been 9 months since the gallery opening. Diane and I are separated. That is the appropriate word for it at this stage, though I suspect it will resolve into something more permanent in time. She deserved an explanation, and I gave her one, and she looked at me for a long time afterward and said, I don't know who you were before me, Adrian, but I'm not sure I know you now either. That was fair. I didn't argue. My business is intact. My reputation has taken a hit in certain circles and risen in others, a fact I find appropriately absurd, that public accountability for an act of cruelty could function as a form of social currency. I don't track it. What I do track is this. Liam and I have had coffee 4 times, twice at a place near his gallery, once at my office, once at a diner near the Cascade Collective where Clara Mendez was also present, which was, I won't lie, one of the most uncomfortable hours of my life. Clara Mendez, it turns out, has precisely 0 patience for men who require the comfort of performance in their accountability. She assessed me with the eyes of a woman who has spent decades watching adults fail children and then expect medals for eventually noticing, and she found me approximately adequate. I'm working on deserving more than approximately adequate. The conversations with Liam are not what I would call warm. They are honest, they are careful. They are 2 people learning the grammar of a relationship that was broken before either of them fully understood what a relationship was supposed to be. He showed me a new piece last month, not yet displayed, still in his studio. A man and a boy sitting at a table. The man is looking at the table. The boy is looking at the man. The light in the painting is morning light, early, tentative, the kind that hasn't yet decided whether it's going to hold. He hasn't told me the title yet. I didn't ask. Some things deserve to be revealed in their own time. I've spent a lot of hours this year sitting with a therapist named Dr. James Rutherford, clinical psychologist, 25 years of practice, a man with the particular gift of making silence feel like a question you need to answer. He has helped me understand some things about avoidant attachment and emotional compartmentalization that I won't detail here, both because they're personal and because the clinical framework, while useful, doesn't actually change the ledger. What changes the ledger is what you do next. I still think about the Thursday evening, about the torn backpack and the door closing and the relief, that shameful, unambiguous relief. I have made my peace with the fact that I will probably think about it for the rest of my life. Dr. Rutherford says that's appropriate, that the absence of guilt would be the more alarming outcome. I think about Marina too, about what she knew and chose not to say. I've done a lot of work around not holding that against her. It is slow work, and some days harder than others. She was afraid. She loved me. She made a choice that, in her mind, protected something she valued. I understand that, even as I understand the cost of it. I think about Liam scrubbing floors in Clara Mendez's studio at 15, sleeping in Union Station at 13, carrying a white envelope for years because opening it meant the last thing his mother had given him was gone. I think about the painting, the blurred man in the doorway, the small boy walking away, the dark that swallows him whole. And I think about the new painting in Liam's studio, the one with the morning light, the table, the 2 figures in the tentative early hours of something that doesn't have a name yet. I don't know what the title is, but I know what I'm hoping for. And for the first time in a very long time, I think hoping might be enough to start with.